Yes, hello and welcome to this seminar of the Swedish Board of Developmental Questions. My name is Charlotta and I will be a moderator today together with Aurora. And we have some instructions before we start regarding Zoom and how this works. And the seminar will be recorded. So if you do not want to be recorded, please keep your camera off. But we are very happy to see some faces since it's always nice not speaking to the black wall of names. Yes, and please make sure to keep your microphone off during the whole seminar. And feel free to ask questions in the chat at any time in either Swedish or English, maybe even Russian, since we have some Russian speakers here today as well. Yes, and over to Aurora.
Hi everyone. I will also be talking today together with Charlotta, and so I'll do a quick roundup of the topic. So the agenda for today will be the current political situation in both Belarus and Russia. However, we will be focusing especially on Belarus. To quickly give a background of our topics, the Belarusian election in August 2020 was by all indicators won by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. Yet the sitting president, Lukasjenko, or dictator, if you will, has remained in office by means of the military. Meanwhile, in Russia, the oppositional leader Navalny is jailed under Putin's rule, accused of a made-up crime. And in both nations, students, journalists, activists, doctors, lawyers, mothers, fathers are continuously jailed, assaulted, or even tortured for partaking in protests or expressing their opinions publicly. And so during this seminar, we hope to highlight violations of human rights, possibilities for new leadership, and explore what we ourselves can do to support the people fighting for democracy. And with us today, we have Katya Vasilieva, teacher, law student, and active member and commissioner of Sveriges Belarusian and Belarus Folkambassad. We also have Dr. Kamal Makili Aliyev, senior lecturer at the Department of Global Political Studies at Malmö Universitet, as well as affiliated researcher at Raoul Wallenberg Institute of Human Rights and Humanitarian Law. I hope I got that right. As Charlotta said, we will conclude the seminar with opening up for questions. Hopefully we can all have an interesting discussion together. Do ask questions in the chat at any time. And now I thought I would start off with you, Katya, if you could tell us a bit about yourself and your connection to Belarus.
Yeah, hi everyone. So exactly as you already mentioned, my name is Katya Vasilieva and I'm originally from Belarus. These days I live in Stockholm, but I moved here for about 14 years ago, and I studied here. So I got my Master of Education in Stockholm and worked as a teacher for a while, and now I'm back to school again and study law at Stockholm University again. And so since I'm from Belarus, and I have always felt that I'm very strongly engaged in the questions regarding human rights and the lack of those rights in my own country. So the events that happened last year couldn't just like leave me indifferent in this way. So I'm an active member of an organization here which is called Sveriges Belarusian, and it's for Belarusians, but also our friends who live in Sweden. And I also represent one of the representatives of People's Embassy in Sweden. And this is it was started after this election last year, and these days we are opened in 16 other countries around the world. Yeah, so maybe I'll stop here.
Yes, nice. So we'll ask Kemal, can you tell us a bit about your background and maybe your connections to Belarus?
Yes, thank you, Charlotta. I am a scholar specializing mostly in international law and human rights. That's my educational and scientific background, but I also did the practical studies of the post-Soviet space, focusing specifically on Eastern Europe and South Caucasus. I am myself from South Caucasus. I'm from Azerbaijan originally. I used to work with Belarus as my country for analysis already when I've been working at the Center for Strategic Studies in Azerbaijan, and that was since 2011 until 2017, after which I moved to Sweden to continue on the scholarly research, doing my postdoctorate and then staying for teaching, etc. But the Belarus was for a long time one of my focus of regional studies, including its human rights angle. Here in Sweden, I worked at the Belarus program that existed in the Raoul Wallenberg Institute for Human Rights and Humanitarian Law until the last year, unfortunately. Due to the events that we're going to be discussing today, the program was discontinued. But I did work with human rights in Belarus for that period of time, and it was a very interesting experience as compared to my political studies of Belarus. So I think I have a little bit to contribute to the discussion in the sense from a more scientific point of view, which may seem a little bit emotionally disconnected, but please do give me a benefit of a doubt. This is going to be a popular scientific discussion from my side, and I hope you take it as for what it is. Thank you.
We definitely look forward to it, Kemal. I think we're going to have a greatly balanced discussion with both you and Katja. Now, Katja, I wondered if you could tell us a bit about you could give us an idea of the current situation for what it's like to live in Belarus currently and what it's been like for the past year.
So you mean the situation in Belarus now, so these days, today? Yeah, so exactly as you mentioned that already, so we saw that the election was falsified last year, and the human rights were so violated, and the protests were met by so strong rejection from the regime, and the situation in Belarus today is very critical. We see that the economy is about to collapse, so it's a high rate of inflation here. But what we see, how the regime makes life worse for the common people of Belarus as well, and uses all possible tools to suppress the people and any kind of protest activity, and mainly with fear. For example, the meeting and other types of mass activities on streets are already forbidden, and it's not because of Corona situation. It took a while to realize for the regime that they could use the situation with pandemic to forbid people to go together. The police and special military forces take people directly from the streets, and people are put into prisons just because they happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And for example, the combination of red, white, oh, sorry, white, red, white. So in your clothing would even, so, or even having pictures on your phone will definitely bring you into the trouble, and people got fined and put in prisons and were arrested just because of that. The regime makes people believe that there is no protest activity, which is not that really true, because only in March, where it was about 1,100 people who were taken or arrested. So they were taken mainly in the streets. So it means that it's quite dangerous these days to be outside and not have a good explanation why you're there. And about the people, about 395 people were judged last month. And so many Belarusians got fines for the crimes they never commit. And it doesn't matter if you're a teenager or a retired person. If you're suspected, you will be taken to the nearest police station and will get the punishment. But the punishment according to the crime which you will get, and not the one you commit. Yeah. And for example, it was a few days ago, it was a story of a 14 years old boy who went to the post office and came across just ordinary people in common clothing who couldn't be defined as police or anything else, and he was just put into minibus. And here I would just like to remind you that we speak about a 14-year-old boy, so it's not an adult or a political activist or something like that. And he was brought to the police station. He was humiliated in this minibus first, got punched, couldn't talk to his parents. He was scared, and it took about 4 or 5 hours for his parents to finally get to know what happened to him and where he was. Now the investigation has started in his case, and unfortunately no lawyers can guarantee a successful outcome in his case or any other similar case. And quite a lot of Belarusians lost their jobs. Many were threatened to dismiss the income or even like the possibility to study at university. Yeah, so it's there are quite a lot of voice and video recordings on the internet of all those violations and threats that ordinary workers and students hear from managers or deans. So, and we cannot speak about like any democracy there at the moment, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yes, so it sounds truly horrible. And maybe Kemal, could you maybe give us an outline of how the regime works and how it could even be possible to have these oppressions against the civilians?
Well, in addition to what Katya said, it's quite clear that the regimes as the one that we're right now witnessing in Belarus in its current stage of development has a very tight security apparatus. And that security apparatus has no connection to the principles of rule of law, for example. So you have judicial system, legislative system, all tied to the executive power and executive system, which controls all these branches, because these branches exist formally. And while they exist formally, they do the bidding of an executive power, which is also concentrating in the hands of the country's current president, or as the Russians right now saying, the basically fake president, and tight circle around him, which controls both security apparatus that allows it to enforce the will of a president and basically have an agenda promoted by the two other branches of power, the judicial and the legislative. So rubber stamp parliament and the judiciary that is enforcing not the laws that are basically promulgated as by the legislative branch, but the executive powers orders. So when you have a system like that, is it a surprise that what Kat is describing? Is it surprising that what Kat is describing happens in reality? No, it's not, because if there is a tension between the population and the political power that has concentrating almost an absolute power in its hands through the unification of the three branches, that is usually usually a feature of a republic. That's what can happen and what usually happens in such cases. So if we put it in a little bit more state building context, it can be a logical result of a system that progressively accumulates and centralizes power.
So to try to touch on what you both just said now, Kamal, you described this the security apparatus as a way of maintaining a military regime and basically controlling people's lives quite effectively. Yeah. And then Katja tells us about the, like, shall I say, the bravery of the people of daring to express their opinions during these times. Even the fact that you are here today, Katja. And I wonder if you have this concrete risk of being persecuted or losing your income or ability to attend university, yet the Belarusians continue to defy the military regime and have done so during the past year. And I myself am quite humbled and fascinated by the people's greatest acts. And so I'm curious to know or to ask if this ability to unite in resistance tells us something of the history and the culture of the Belarusian people. And that's something that I'd like to hear both of your opinion on.
Shall I maybe start? Yeah, so exactly. So like Kamal said already, so it's a huge apparatus that taking control of people's life at the moment. And there were also some statistics. I think that the people who once got in prison there, so they were less, maybe not less, not all of them, but some of them are no longer afraid of going outside and show there. So that they are against the regime and against the legitimate president. So, but what it's important to know about Belarus and its people, that historically the territory of Belarus belonged to or was divided so many times between different neighboring countries, and there were quite a lot of discussion about that before. So, and the country got its freedom about 100 years ago, and then quite soon it became a part of Soviet Union some years later. And people of Belarus so are quite modest and patient. They are hardworking and supportive of themselves. It's like some kind of national maybe characteristics, and so again, historically, because of its geographical position, Belarus suffered quite a lot during all the wars. During the First World War, during the Second World War, and the country. Mainly people, were famous for the Belarusian resistance movement. As I said in the beginning, so people are quite patient, but there is always the last drop. And exactly, so if I will make a parallel with the Second World War, so it was. Belarusians were famous for their Belarusian resistance movement and partisan activity, which means that we already have the tradition of struggling for what we believe in, for our rights, for life and freedom, and not always openly, right? Because in coming back to what happened last year, so from the beginning we could see quite massive demonstrations, and sometimes they were very creative in its form, right, with performances and music, still peaceful, and people showed peacefully that they were against the lie that was presented like truth. And nowadays, so again, since the demonstrations are forbidden and people don't want to risk their lives, they may be to be arrested, so they continue struggle in different ways. So they became more creative, exactly like during the Second World War. They didn't fight openly all the time, so not always in the battlefields, but they were very effective, and made it difficult for the Germans in this case, so to get what they wanted at the same time. So today we see that people changed their way of showing their protests. So it can be anything from just, as I told, so that you have special color combination in your clothing, or so organizing internet event or in events online, right? So people started doing, so I mean, when I say that, I mean people in the country, in Belarus, they organize different flash mobs. They also dance quite a lot and like show their protest this way, so in peaceful way.
Yeah, I just wanted to add something small to what you just said about the peacefulness. I'm sure I'm not the only one who saw the picture from demonstrations last year in the summer, where Belarusians, they took off their shoes before standing on a bench, so in order to not litter, or I don't know. It seems like we have a lot to learn when it comes to how to peacefully, I don't know, be in the streets and express one's opinions. It really is astonishing. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and that was really interesting observation about people, because even those Belarusian people also, they are kind and sometimes modest in some ways, but like at the same time they as you took this example with the bench, so they didn't want to litter there. So it's one thing a revolution, another thing to stay and live in this country. That's why maybe no shopping windows were broken. Yeah, there was that happened, but it was the police who did that. So not the peaceful demonstrators, and people collected the litter after themselves, so and made sure that everything is in the same way as it was before they came there. Yeah, something very different.
Do you want to add to this question, Kemal?
Yeah, thank you. I don't think, frankly, that it's that I'm the right person, or it's even appropriate for me to comment on the qualities of the Belarusian people, especially with the Belarusians in the room. However, I can do I can do a little bit. I'll take a little bit different angle and talk about how that struggle came to where it is in the also logic of the development of a country. And what I have seen during my research about Belarus and its political situation is that you have to understand that the post-Soviet period, when it just began, was very difficult for all the post-Soviet countries, including Russia and, of course, Belarus and Azerbaijan, from where I come from. And that period warranted something from its leaders is that the people have been demanding at least the same level of stability and prosperity that they experienced during the Soviet Union, which promising that is, of course, a populist notion, because it wasn't possible. It wasn't possible to go back completely, but it was possible to sit on that agenda and promote it as much as possible in order to get the political gains. And that's exactly what Lukashenko did first. And so the social contract that was forged when Lukashenko came to power was that, just like in the Soviet times, or maybe not just like, I'm generalizing to make the discussion simpler. Just like in Soviet times, people would sacrifice their political freedoms for the stability and prosperity and development. And while this social contract existed, that would be the case. And during the first years of his ruling and with the development of the country, the social contract was actually fulfilled more or less to a certain degree. If you would compare Belarus, an example, when it arrived to 2010s as a period of time, you would see that it was pretty well developed as compared to Russia or to neighboring Ukraine, especially Moldova. It was incomparably developed compared to the Central Asian post-Soviet states. And this was demonstrated by the regime as something that the social contract is fulfilled, and which also allowed it to dismiss the opposition towards that this kind of development is not sustainable because of a multitude of miscalculations when it comes to the politics, economy, foreign policy, etc., etc., etc. Not going into that, but that allowed Lukashenko to dismiss the opposition in this sense, because we've seen the protest against his rule continuously through his political career, so to say. But what is different now is that after 2010 and up to the situation in 2020, the situation with the economy and development in Belarus started to deteriorate. And it was started for him to become more and more difficult to sustain that level of development and provide his people with more and more, so to say, continuous and sustainable development after ladder, both economically, politically, in terms of the development of a society as well, because society wasn't waiting for Lukashenko to develop the country, it was also developing inside. And as the social contract deteriorated, 2020 basically became the year where that contract was broken, where the situation on the ground with the people created a misunderstanding with the regime to the level where they've seen that the development is not there, but the political freedoms are also not there. So what are we sacrificing our political freedoms for? And the situation escalated to such a level where you couldn't possibly live with this, with the continued presence of this unequal exchange anymore. And hence, the level of the protests and the level of the support. Because before that, you wouldn't have that majority support, because the silent majority was there saying, okay, the trade-off pays off, we have a development, but not anymore. And that's why you see a very different picture in 2020 and now.
Okay, very, very interesting. And as you mentioned before, this whole system of security and the regime, the structure of the regime, do you think it's mainly maybe the fault of Lukashenko? Is it his personal ideology, or do you think if Lukashenko was to be replaced, do you think the system will continue in the same way, or yeah, what's your take on this, Kemal?
What I can say is that in a sense it wasn't unexpected that this is going to lead to this way. There is a reason why you need to have a change of leadership in the republics, because, as I said, when you reach your peak of a development and you given the country whatever you can, there is time to step away and let others lead. That is a normalcy for the republic. Everything else that goes further, and then there would be another social contract there, or maybe the continuation of the present social contract, but that's not your business anymore. You've done your job, you step away, and hopefully if you add the democracy into the republic, you do it for the democratic elections. That didn't happen, and that's why we are where we are. And because that didn't happen, the breach of a contract is understood only from the part of the people, but not the government or the power behind the government. In the eyes of the government is still fulfilling its part of a social contract, which creates a conflict, of course, conflict of interests, conflict between the people and the power, and creates a situation where there is a power struggle that is going to end one or the other way. Making a prognosis of what is going to happen to Lukashenko and his governance is basically looking at the crystal ball. For now, we are in the status quo, and Katya is explaining that status quo. There is a very, very real, very, very, very real and demonstrated willingness and ability from the power to use force against its own people, to a certain degree, which in certain demonstrations shows its escalation. For example, Lukashenko carrying an AK-47 in its arms, and that's basically a statement of sorts of what kind of power the government can use. On the other hand, as we just talked and as we praised, we have a people who are not willing to use the same force, who are willing to protest peacefully. And that creates a discrepancy in terms of the power that one of our side is going to use. So if you ask me, and I understand that this can be rather green thought, is that when you have a discrepancy in terms of willingness to use power like that, the peaceful protest can only go so far in trying to put the pressure on the government. That's not a call for unpeaceful process and the bloody struggle. That is not something I would advise, or that is not something I would wish in any case. But given the situation, given the demonstration of power on the other side, it doesn't seem that there are real mechanisms as of now and today of pushing, extending enough pressure on the government to step out.
Where do we go from there to the next question? The opposition that we speak of has been, shall I say, it has been led by, enlarged by women. And that's something that obviously I think would explain part of the peacefulness. And so what we know is that the election last year was most likely won by a woman, and that was Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. And she was aided in her political campaign by Veronika Tsepkalo, another prominent opposer to Lukasjenko. And then there's also among the many women who've courageously opposed Lukasjenko, there was also Maria Kolesnikova, who led protesters and is now jailed, whereas Svetlana and Veronika are both exiled, as far as I understand. And though he remains in office, these are three of the women among many who have effectively impaired a dictator, if not gotten him out of office yet. And I wanted to ask you, Katja, if that's something you could tell us about how they've shaped the resistance and what they mean to the people.
Yeah, you mean so the political leaders? I mean, so Tikhanovskaya, Kolesnikova, and Tsepkalo, the three women. Yeah, you mean that, right? Yeah. So. So definitely Svetlana Tikhanovskaya became the symbol of protest movement last year. And she is already a very important part of the history. In general, you could say that the whole situation with that happened last year, so is a part of the history a part of history of Belarus. And they first of all none of them were planning to run this campaign, and it was actually so Svetlana's husband who was planning to become or to apply to be the candidate, and not she, but he was taken and put in prison. And it happened the same with other male candidates. Either they were put in prison or they were forced to leave the country. And so actually, I mean, not all the male candidates, but those who were, I would say, the real danger to Lukashenko. And that's why the last minute, so Svetlana Tikhanovskaya decided to apply for this campaign and nominated her own. And it wasn't seen by the regime as a real danger. That's why. So it was. She was allowed to do so, and then they started when her candidate was accepted. They started to travel around the country and collect the signs of supporters, and they demonstrated and tried to bring up the most important questions that most of Belarusians were speaking inside their houses, but never openly, since it was not that common for speak or maybe go and have this protest outside. And then Maria Kolesnikova and Veronika Tsepkalo also joined, and they saw that it was very important, extremely important to be united in this campaign. And definitely they became the symbol, the female symbol of this protest movement and democratic movement in Belarus. And it's really interesting because Lukasjenko has said several times in his speech that like constitution is not written for women, so that women cannot be in power, even though female leaders are not something very unusual in Belarus. Women, there are quite a lot of strong women, female leaders, maybe not so many in regarding politics. And yeah, so they definitely became the symbol of democratic protest movement of last year.
Very, very interesting. And so a question now for Kemal. Maybe there is no secret recipe to overthrow a dictator, but what do you think is needed to have a turn towards a more democratic society in Belarus? And maybe what could the other countries do, and what can we do?
Thank you, Carlotta. You actually asked one of the most difficult questions that I can imagine, because I don't want to bore you, but I think I will need to do it a little bit and maybe be a little bit even provocative in this sense. Think about the situations where you had a very strong authoritarian leader or even a dictator in power. Say Iraq or Libya, and think now about the outcomes of toppling those two dictators, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya and Saddam Hussein in Iraq. Have we seen the development of democracy on an adequate level, at least in those two countries? We haven't. Because those two events are not necessarily connected in principle. So the automatic removal of a strong authoritarian leader, or even repressive authoritarian leader, dictator, if you will, whatever you choose to name that oppressive person, out of power, does not necessarily create conditions for the democratic development from the start. It is, of course, precondition, one of the preconditions, because with that kind of power in governance, you are highly unlikely on the astronomical level to get to the democracy at any point while that authoritarian leader is in power. It's one of the preconditions, but it's not a guarantee for the democratic development. And when it comes to the Belarus, I have a theory, a small theory that is, of course, not proven. It's not yet scientifically proven theory. So I want to make sure you do that. It's something that I work with on the amount of anecdotal evidence rather than the empirical or something very, very grounded. But I think it's also very entertaining one, and maybe you'll find it interesting as well. When it comes to the post-Soviet space, the democratic development have been struggling, and not only in Belarus, in other countries as well, right? So when we're talking about the preconditions for the democratic development, usually we use the terms like grassroots democracy. On the post-Soviet space that we're covering, minus Baltic states, I will come back to them as well, the history of grassroots democracy is practically non-existent. And in this sense, that's going to sound provocative. Now, bear with me, Europe is privileged, and Sweden is privileged. Don't mean it in a bad way. I mean it in the way that the history or historical conditions came into the situation that this continent had the longest history of grassroots democracy. Simple example to make it for people who are not professionals. In Europe for a very long time, you can find the historical records of people in the very small townships coming together on the level of the region of a township, or township itself, to combine the efforts to solve the local problems, so-called municipalities or communes in Sweden, for example, right? They are the development from those kind of interactions. On post-Soviet space, that never existed. There was always a search for the leader. It might be something connected with the expansion of the Mongol Empire at certain place and this leadership of the tribes, etc., which then spread into Russia. And then, but if you look at the post-Soviet space, you will see that there's always a search for the leader there. Have Vladimir Putin, Nur Sultan Nazarbayev in Kazakhstan, Lukasjenko in Belarus, and it doesn't matter if those are Muslim countries or Christian countries. The traditions of the governance are sustained, while in Europe, the traditions of coming together on a small level and solving the problems on the municipal level, grassroots democracy. We come together, we negotiate, we talk, and then we decide, do we pay money for somebody to build the infrastructure, or we do it ourselves and everybody chips in, right? And then you would look at where the Europeans expanded most with their agenda, and you look at the Americas and where the grassroots democracy is also thriving. And then you would look at where that wasn't brought with the European expansion and settlement, such as Asia, which was colonized, Africa, which was colonized. And you will see that the traditions of grassroots democracy are not thriving there. So I'm on the account of sounding grim again. The problem is not for Belarus and for most other post-Soviet countries, including Russia, is not only in removing the authoritarian leaders. There is a huge risk that this authoritarian leader is going to be succeeded by another one. Worse, less authoritarian, it doesn't really matter. The problem goes much deeper than that. It goes to the tradition of governance and the tradition of wielding power. And the acknowledgement that the grassroots democracy needs to grow somewhere, that grass needs to come up in order to then make the foundation. And that is a huge process to go. And if you look at the Baltic states, we have been historically connected more to the Europe than to the expansion of the Mongol Empire, so to say, before, where the tribes seek the leader to follow. You would see that they are quite disconnected and integrated in the European Union in this sense. And that's your anecdotal evidence. Of course, I don't have an empirical proof of that. It's an interesting theory. But I wanted just to show you why I'm a little bit skeptical about the connecting those two. And removing the authoritarian power is only the first step. There are so many other things to do after that to bring on democratic development.
Yeah, so I just would like to add here a little bit about the what Kamal said, if it's okay. So exactly as Kamal mentioned that it's very strong tradition about having a strong leader in post-Soviet countries, and that's something that most opposition leaders do understand, or started recognizing more and more. For example, both Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and Pavel Latushka have been speaking about not only about a new fair election in Belarus, if we come back to Belarus, but it's also important to mention about this, about building a new political system in countries like Belarus and Russia, for example, where the president or prime minister has not the whole power himself, and many political parties must be represented in the parliament. It's something that is very common here in European countries, and for example here in Sweden, right? But in post-Soviet countries, it's not that common, and it's something that started or have been discussed the recent months more and more.
So as you've both rightly pointed out, that neither grassroots movements nor democracy is established overnight. Given the situation that we're in now, it is my understanding that one great way to impair an impressive leader is through political sanctions, and that has been done in the past year. And I wanted to ask you, Katja, if you could tell us a bit about how political sanctions and similar, such as Melodifestivalen, and now recently where Belarus was excluded from participation, how that matters politically and for the people of Belarus.
Yeah, so if we start with like those events like hockey championships in Belarus that was cancelled this year, as well as Eurovision and Belarusian songs or singers, they were not allowed to participate in the Eurovision Song Contest. So it's it may be not the same. It doesn't have the same maybe effect like compared to economical sanctions that are pointed to specific people, but it's a quite clear signal from European Union that to the regime that it's not okay that you like fight your own people one day and then so you host these huge events another day. Yeah, so it's also important to remember that hockey is Lukasjenko's favorite sport. So it was, I can think that that it was he most likely took it personally as well. So because he plays and he follows, and it's very important. It's so much about status and prestige for him. So that was really good that it was cancelled again. Coming back to sanctions, so that European Union take against some Belarusian officials. It's important that they continue expand this list, and more people are needed to be included in this list. First of all, those people who violated other Belarusians' rights. Here we speak about the judges who send people to prisons without any reasons, or give them fines. The deans, who exclude students for their political activity, for their right to freedom of speech, right? For those managers and directors of huge enterprises that support support the regime, and those who fire the workers. And of course, those lists should be much broader, and the names shouldn't be written off the last minute. Even though so that the regime will send this picture that sanction doesn't work, and so they don't care about being on that sanction list or not. That's not true, and we know that already that they work, and it's much more difficult for those people to continue with their crimes. Lukashenko so seeks support in Russia at the moment, and he knows already now that European Union is not going to help him or collaborate with him, and that's something that European countries need to continue be persistent on that question, and that's why for example, there are some huge enterprises, European enterprises that continue collaborating with the Belarusian state factories and enterprises as well. So they need to see over their collaboration and make sure that the workers' rights, the people's rights who work there are not violated. And it's really hard to be guaranteed that, because we are speaking about dictatorship, about military regime at the moment, and the truth is not out, and it means that you might get maybe quite okay numbers on the paper, right, on document, but in reality it's not true, and people are oppressed with fear. Yeah, so that's why it's really important that there is another regulation, another way, another power against those oppressions, those violations of human rights inside the country.
Yes, thank you very much, Kemal and Katja. This has been so interesting, even so interesting that we forgot about the time a bit.
But definitely, we've gone way too long about this, but yeah.
We still have a few minutes left, and I saw that there's been some questions in the chat. So maybe Karin, you can take over now with these questions.
Yes. Yes, we will try and go through some of the questions. Yeah, we will begin right away, I think. We have a question of how has the government responded to the strikes organized by the opposition? Maybe any of Kemal, Katja, do any of you want to feel that you can answer this?
Yeah, so I can tell that first of all, it's not. It's quite common that Belarusian regime or propaganda says that it was organized by the opposition, which is not true, so complete true. So I would say that people are ready to demonstrate without, because like, you know, so Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, the democratic leader, right, and according to the results of the platform Voice, it was she who won the election, but she had to leave the country. She is in exile at the moment, and even though her first videos that she or her first speech that she sent to the population of Belarus, she said that it's important that you're safe. So she couldn't say to the people, go outside and show your protest, because she didn't want other ordinary people to get harmed there. Anyway, so people did that without any opposition leader, you can say so, and hard for the regime the first months to react to that, because all political leaders, they were either in prison or in exile. Still, people went out. We could see these mass protests on the streets in every single town of Belarus, and even in small towns. Yeah, so small, very small towns. So people went and they showed their protest. Yeah, so they were met by brutality and violence from the regime side, and of course that's not acceptable in terms of human rights and and freedom.
Yeah. We will go on with one more question. What are the ways to develop grassroots democracy institutions? Maybe, Kamal, do you have something to say?
Yeah, I read that question in chat, and it's
Yeah.
a very interesting question. For the person who is going to be able to answer that question, I think we will nominate that person for the Nobel Peace Prize, and that person would be deserving it. And when I have that answer, I'll share it with you, Kirill, and you can nominate me. But jokes aside, the second part of the question is much more interesting. Are current leaders, democratic movements, Tikhanovsky, Navalny, doing it in any form? Even if I didn't read your name, even if what was stricken out was an anonymous question, I would know that you're from post-Soviet. Look at how you look at the problem, how I look at the problem. That's our upbringing. What are Tikhanovsky and Navalny going to do to create a grassroots? That's not how the grass works. It goes down, not from up to bottom, from bottom up. And the only thing that they actually have to do is do nothing. Do not crush that grass. That's how the grass works. You don't need to water it. You don't need to do anything. It's going to grow. Just don't step on it. And that, of course, is the challenge in developing the grassroots democracy institutions, is because when you are an upper politician, you want to win elections. And in order to do that, you want to not be interfered by the grass that goes up there as well. Because that grass is going to be first thing it's going to do instinctively in post-Soviet, in Belarus as well. It's going to look at you for solutions. And when you tell that grass, wait, I'm not interfering. You solve your local problems yourself in order to develop as a community. Then the community is going to look up and say, why do we need you? And that's where the misunderstanding is. And you see that in societies in Asia, in post-Soviet, in Middle East, in Africa, and it's continuous and it's there and you can see it. So that's what I'm saying. Growing the grass there is a very tricky question, which warrants a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yes. We will go over time a little bit, but I hope this is okay. We have one final question. Do you think the peaceful protests and how the regime has responded to them have any potential of creating opposing views or conflicts within the regime itself? Do any of you feel like you can say something about this?
I think that, so maybe I can try to answer this question. So there are some signs and already that many officials who work for the regimes, they are against. And of course, Belarus is not that huge country. So, and most of them who are divided now. So the regime side and the democratic opposition or protest movement, you can say that. They all of them, they know each other. So they work together or they worked together. They have their different use within families, and of course there are even signs that within the military and military apparatus. So there are also people who are against the regime, but it's so hard to live this. It's hard to not to be hated from another side. And what the national anti-crisis management is doing at the moment, because so after the election, after some opposition leaders were sent to exile, and leave and work from Baltic states or Poland, from the neighboring countries, they appeared in new alternative structures that are willing to collaborate with civic society within the country. For example, this national anti-crisis management, and they have this plan how to help those people who are officials and who don't want to you say that, who don't want to continue to contribute to those violations. They have some strategies how those people can move to another side. And there are some even people who worked in the police who left their positions. So it means that quite a lot of them are disappointed, but it's still fear and these huge apparatus that make it still possible.
Thank you.
If it was the answer to the question.
Yeah. I think this was our last question for today. But before we finish, I just want to remind you all that this seminar will be uploaded to YouTube, so you will be able to find it there afterwards, and that you're welcome to support by becoming a member in FUF. And we want to thank you all for joining us today, and we want to give a special thanks to Kamal and to you, Katja, for being a part of this seminar. I think I can speak for all of us that it has been very interesting to have you both here and to hear what you have to say on this subject. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so very much, Katja and Kamal, and I apologize for an hour not being longer than 60 minutes. There's quite a few questions that we haven't even had the opportunity to touch on yet. Perhaps this warrants another event on the topic. I myself was eager to discuss the possibilities of what we ourselves can do in aid of Russians and Belarusians. So let's say I hope to do this again, if I may end with that, and to continue with all the things that I would like to hear from both of you and to discuss.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much again. That was very interesting, and I hope we were able with Katja to shed a little bit of light on what is happening from two different angles.
Yeah. Thank you. So I felt the same. Thank you.